everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. On this podcast, we pull from this seemingly endless queue of movies, television shows, and maybe even other surprises along the way as part of our podcast channel From the Queue. On this episode, we will discuss The Best of Times, released January 31st, 1986, just days after the Bears Super Bowl, now that I'm thinking about it.
Jack Dundee married the boss's daughter.
10 years ago, I gave you a job so she wouldn't be married to a bum.
He became a pillar of society.
You're a low-life, blackmailing squid.
I will not even dignify that with a reply.
But there was one mistake he could never live down.
You dropped the ball.
So now he's living it over.
I am throwing down the gauntlet. Ow! What do I do now? Be cool. Be what?
The Best of Times, rated PG-13.
Starts Friday, January 31st at Select Theater.
Please subscribe, like, and review From the Queue on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, especially Spotify and Apple, as you can get those algorithms going with positive feedback. You can also find our channel on BlueSky at From the Queue. You can find us on Instagram and Threads at From the Queue. If you're listening to us on YouTube, all our links will be in the description below. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Instagram at Jerome Cuson. You can find me on BlueSky at JeromeC1985. My co-host, as always, is Brian, at Brian to Brain. You can find him on Twitter for now, at Brian to Brain. And Brian, I have to be honest, coming into this, I'm like, Robin Williams and Kurt Russell, a script by Ron Shelton. How bad could this be? This has to be at least pretty decent. Boy, oh boy, Brian, I have to say, this is one of the biggest disappointments that I've ever had. And to be clear, Brian and I, sometimes we will veto decisions. We will veto certain movies because either we know we're not going to like it or we know we've watched it in the past and haven't liked it. But I was like, you know what, Robin Williams and Kurt Russell, how bad could this be? Again, we got Ron Shelton as a writer on this. It's from the 80s, scratching a bit of a sweet spot. Brian, this movie's a mess, and it's not very good, and I'm not blaming you for making this choice because, again, I went along with it, but this was one of the more difficult watches that I have ever had in our time podcasting together. And it's not that this movie is, this is not, if this were a superhero movie, this would be like Pile of Shame. But there's so many things about this movie that just fundamentally do not work. And a lot of it feels like the director just didn't know what he was doing. And again, we don't know that for sure, but that's how it comes across to me.
That's definitely how it comes across to me. So this movie, I found out about it a couple of years ago. I was on a Robin Williams binge, pretty much. I wanted to see a lot of the 80s stuff that I'd never seen before. Being a 90s kid, obviously, we grew up on Mrs. Doubtfire, Aladdin, even Flubber, and all the 90s Robin Williams movies. You know what I'm saying? And Toys even I saw in theaters. I was a big Robin Williams fan, so when I found out that HBO Max had all these hidden, I wanted to say hidden gems, you know what I'm saying? Moscow on the Hudson is another one. Cadillac Man is another good one I saw of his from the 80s. That's a good one with Tim Robbins. If you haven't seen that one, we might talk about that one later in the year. But yeah, that's another good Robin Williams performance. When I found out about this, I was like, oh my God, this is checking off all the boxes for me. Kurt Russell, Robin Williams, and then the guy, we talked about, you just mentioned him, Ron Shelton, director of Bull Durham, White Men Can't Jump, Tin Cup, Play It to the Bone. I know how some people feel about Play It to the Bone, but I really enjoy that as a boxing movie. He also wrote, what's that other one with Samuel L. Jackson? I forget what it is, but it's kind of like a Don King kind of one too. He wrote that one. So he's got some experience, obviously, in the sports genre, but this one just kind of felt like, I don't know, it was a tone that was kind of missing. They didn't know whether it was going to be more of a drama or more of a comedy. And they should have leaned in more of the comedy, I think, because you got Robin Williams there in his prime. But it just feels like they just wanted to do more of the sports drama aspect to it, which doesn't really, I think, work. You know what I mean? Fundamentally, I think this movie doesn't work, but I think that what's good for this movie is like the YouTube clips, like because there are some really good moments in this movie, which we'll get into. But I think that the best parts of the movie are, are just a few like cool sports moments, and then that's it. And then you get all these like characters that you really don't like. Actually, it's like very unlikable. It's almost as if Robin Williams was casted to play Cartman before Cartman was even a thing, and it's like it felt like I've seen this movie twice now in 2 years, but it just feels like he's playing a Cartman type role, and that just doesn't seem like a Robin Williams type role to me. It just didn't feel like the kind of role that he's like relatable and vulnerable, and you're rooting for the guy as the underdog. And yeah, here obviously he's the underdog, but he's a very unlikable underdog to the point where at times it's like you don't even want to see this guy succeed, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with the characters. I think they just didn't get the characters right in terms of all that. But yeah, this came out January 31st, 1986. You mentioned right after the Super Bowl. Robin Williams has gone on to say later on that Roger Spottiswoode, the director of the movie, a Canadian, probably was a mistake to cast or to make him the director because, as a Canadian, not really too familiar with American football. I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, he did shoot. Like, I'll say this: the night game was shot well, but the whole scoring thing was making no sense. I don't even know how they got to 26. The only way they got to 26, I'm talking about the bad guy team, Bakersfield or whatever. They would have to miss 2 field goals for that. That's almost never. I don't know. It's so weird that they would just do it like that because, like,
it would be two missed extra points. Brian, did you connect with Bakersfield being the bad team?
Kinda. I don't know. I've been to Bakersfield once, I think, and I always confuse with Baker, California. But Bakersfield, California, is just like the central. It's it's Central California, and you just go through it if you're trying to get to San Francisco, pretty much, or going down to L.A. And that was kind of like the thing about the wife in this movie is like she's trying to go to L.A. So yeah, it was just kind of like wow, I mean, I don't have like a rivalry thing with Bakersfield or anything. It's just like Bakersfield is just like kind of like this city or this this place in Central California that's got like nothing going on. It's a desert. You look at it on the map. There's very little green around it. So it's it's kind of like this town that is very forgotten, it feels like. It sucks. But, if you look at like the WWE schedule over the years, this is a good town for a house show. And I get it because that's kind of like that kind of town that would probably show up for a house show and appreciate it. So Bakersfield is kind of like underappreciated and forgotten, but it's a desert town. You know what I mean? And it does have one of the biggest oil fields in the world or whatever in Kern County as well. So that stuff about in the beginning of the movie, Robin Williams pretty much describes the history of the town. And it's true about the oil fields there. So that was pretty cool. But at the same time, it's still a desert town that's not really going or having a lot going on for it. Oh, you want to say something?
Yeah, this is just a weird movie all around. And I think, I don't know if it was Greg Daniels or Mike Schur, but someone in that area, because they were addressing Michael Scott. And I think that this is something that holds true. And it's something that I will cite quite often when talking about a movie or TV show. You can have a character that is incompetent, you can have a character that is unlikable, but you cannot have a protagonist that is both. If you have a protagonist that is both, your movie does not work or your TV show does not work. In this case, I think Robin Williams and Kurt Russell are both until basically the final like 10 minutes of the movie. They are both unlikable and incompetent. They kind of treat their wives pretty poorly, especially Robin Williams. The whole impetus for the game, like Robin Williams pretending to be the tiger and vandalizing the room, like that's just a weird choice because it fundamentally changes it changes like the game and how you're thinking about the game because you're supposed to be on Taft's side, but Bakersfield really hasn't done anything. Like, yes, his father is a jerk. The father-in-law is a jerk, no doubt. But that's not really a good impetus. Like, to me, there should have been players on the other team that were kind of antagonistic towards our protagonist. That's another thing that I think this movie is lacking. And as much as Little Giants doesn't work in many ways, I do think they get some elements right because they do have, some of the kids are bullies. The coach is a bully. I do think that, I mean, again, I look at someone like Rick Moranis. Rick Moranis is very likable in terms of as kind of the coach. And here you don't really have any likable characters. And with Any Given Sunday, like Al Pacino is, it's a very different because it's not a traditional underdog sports movie. He is competent and he is somewhat likable. So I think again, it's a really tough thing. I just don't think that this movie really understood the strengths of Kurt Russell and Robin Williams in terms of how they play off of each other, and I think that's why it doesn't work. And I think Kurt Russell is obviously somebody that you and I both enjoy a lot. He is a star. He has a presence about him. He has obviously been in a lot of Tarantino movies of late, and he was in the Godzilla TV series, so he clearly has some cachet. But you can watch this movie and I think have a clear understanding of why he never rose to the heights of a Sylvester Stallone or an Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you can also see why Bruce Willis, within a few years, would pass him up in terms of like A-list action star. This is the kind of movie where I think you see that, just because I don't think Kurt Russell is used very well. And yeah, it's a very weird thing.
Yeah, so some other notes following up on this movie. Yeah, it seems like Robin Williams and Kurt Russell, they played football in high school, so they didn't need a body double. So I was really impressed by that, because I guess what I'm seeing is like Kurt Russell getting like all these like shots, like real like tackles, and I'm just thinking like this dude is getting beat up. Like what are you doing? And then when I read this, I'm like, dude, this guy took a beating when he was making this movie, because if this is true, like he was taking some real tackles in the mud at the end of the movie. Robin Williams didn't play most of the game, so good for him. But if you look at the last shot of the movie where he does catch the ball, I don't know. I thought it was like maybe it was just luck, but did you notice how the ball was like shaking, and it was very like one of those sports moments that is just like in the moment in time, almost like that Giants catch where the guy caught it on his helmet. I thought that was one of the most like luckiest takes I've ever seen, because he's juggling the ball and the ball almost goes around his back, yet he somehow gets the ball in possession and gets control of the ball. So I thought that was really impressive, because that seems like one of those like 1 in a million type lucky shots, and they got it right. So I was really impressed with that.
I would love to know how many takes that took. I mean, Robin Williams,
15, maybe 20, I would say.
Robin Williams and Kurt Russell both played high school football. I think it definitely feels more like Kurt Russell was a high school football player. I don't know if Robin Williams was making a conscious choice to physically carry himself like someone who had never played football before, but it's really weird that he's a third stringer and yet he doesn't know how to play. It's the whole premise of the movie is kind of strange, but I think what works about that catch is I think it's all in Robin Williams' performance against somebody who is able to just physically do those things. And even if this movie doesn't totally work, I mean, you definitely get those flashes of brilliance from Robin Williams, either an improv line, or you clearly get like the moment when he's moving the TV when they're eating dinner with the wives. Like that is a funny moment, even if the whole scene, the whole premise of the scene just it's really weird, because this movie, while it was written by Ron Shelton, it doesn't feel like it was written by Ron Shelton. It feels like you're missing the elements of a Ron Shelton type movie that really allow us to dig into the characters, allow us to understand who they are. I think specifically of something like Bull Durham. I think this is one of the best examples. Like within the first 20 minutes of the movie, you establish Susan Sarandon, Kevin Costner, and Tim Robbins. Like you clearly know who those characters are. Like Susan Sarandon, granted, some of it is a shortcut with a little bit of narration from Susan Sarandon, but that tells us so much about who she is. Kevin Costner has his kind of big monologue where he talks about believing in like America in some ways, and how he's not going to participate in the contest with Nuke. And it's just, you really get a sense of who the characters are, and that's missing from this movie. I kept waiting for like a monologue from either Robin Williams or Kurt Russell, or from both, that really just dug into these characters. And it's weird, because I feel like the way that this movie started by beginning with that history of Bakersfield, it's like, okay, they're really Taft, they're giving us a sense of this place and really letting us understand this place. But then we don't get that with the characters. We don't get the motivation. It just feels like, and I mean, it's like, yes, you're kind of you're telling and not showing to an extent, but I really wanted a moment where like Robin Williams was telling Kurt Russell like why they needed to play the game. Like fundamentally, like we need to play this game not just for the pride of the city, but for our own personal pride. Like we need to take some of that back. And like at the end of the day, like part of it is about, getting back with our wives, but like it's a pride thing. And I think that's never really illustrated. And I think that's another reason the motivations for me were just not there. And it just felt like this movie was a series of set pieces that sometimes felt very disjointed. And especially the scene with the wives just felt right out of a 1950s sitcom. I mean, like we don't. And I think the other issue is that, like, building up to that scene, like, clearly things with the wives are not going well. But the dialogue at the dinner just feels so stilted because we don't know these characters, and there's like this refusal of the movie to really get into who these characters are beyond just they're playing in a game or they're withholding sex or whatever, and one of them wants to be a singer. Like there's no there. There's no depth to any of the people that are involved, and just all of a sudden we are told that Kurt Russell and Robin Williams are obsessed with football and desperately want to see a Monday Night Football game that apparently has no bearing because it's two bad teams. There's no there. That's why the movie is just not very good.
Yeah, and I want to put over Pamela Reed. I think she's a great actress. I think she actually steals the show in Kindergarten Cop, folks. And I mean that wholeheartedly as a person who was a big fan of Kindergarten Cop. I think she does a great job in that movie and steals the show. And I actually think she's the best performance in this movie. I just feel like she's the one that was getting closer. Like she was the one character that you were kind of like finding like her motivations the most. Like she wants to be a singer. She wants to get out of town. She got those kind of like dialogue or those lines to kind of explain her motivations. When you get to the Robin Williams character and his motivations, it just seems like he's just obsessed with like this catch, and it's all about him. It's only about him, and it doesn't matter about the town or whatever. He's just manipulating everyone around him to get that moment in time and just win it back. And it's just such an Eric Cartman thing to do. You know what I'm saying? It just feels like he was an Eric Cartman type, and he's just manipulating everyone around him just to get what he wants. And it's very unlikable, and it just feels like they should have switched to the dynamic, I think. And Kurt Russell should have been the likable guy, and maybe his friend that, dropped the ball all those years ago, maybe he has to convince him to come back and, redeem himself or something like that. And maybe not put, this character that Robin Williams plays in this kind of position and make him, maybe even put him in a lower kind of state where he has to rise out, and rise above that kind of thing. But they didn't do any of that. They just kind of made it about these two dudes who grew up in the same town, and they have these wives that want to leave them because they want, or one wife is kind of like satisfied but just are sick of his bullshit about football, which is Robin Williams. And then you got Kurt Russell, his wife, and that's Pamela Reed, and she just wants out of that town, and she's just sick of the town, and she wants something more, and she thinks she can be a famous singer or whatever. And it's just kind of like, okay, we get it. But that scene at the dinner table you mentioned, it feels like you could have cut that scene out and just still had a 90-minute movie. You know what I mean? And I felt like that was like just tacked on for padding. Because if you just eliminate that scene, everything just plays out the same. You know what I mean? And even I think the best scene in the movie is the scene in the dance, right? That's where we kind of see Robin Williams be vulnerable, and he takes his glasses off, and he's becoming a little more relatable to the audience. That's the Robin Williams that I missed. That's the one thing I feel like we could have like right now is like these kind of performances that are not necessarily like physical comedy or like comedies, much. I think if Robin Williams was here like in 2024, we would have got more of these like kind of roles. You know what I'm saying? Like where he's just kind of being vulnerable and just so like, I don't know. I just miss that guy because he's so relatable as a human being, and when he's on screen, I think that's kind of the magic of Mrs. Doubtfire. I think a lot of people relate to him in that role, especially. But there's something about him that I just miss, and that scene in the bathroom when they're at the dance, that really made me miss Robin Williams a lot. But other than that, it just feels like he's doing an Eric Cartman thing, which is really sad because that's not the way you should approach this character. You want him to be relatable, and I don't know why they made him so unlikable, and that they even we even got like, I want to say a cameo, but it's like a kind of a side role of the sex worker. Do you want to talk about is it Margaret Winton? Also the owner of the Cleveland Indians in Major League. I was shocked she was even in this movie. I forgot about it. the second time around, but I was just kind of like, oh yeah, she's in this movie. But then you realize they waste her as a sex worker, and she's not even. I don't know. It seems like they were trying to do a love triangle with her and Kurt Russell's wife, and then they just
Again,
totally
it's
eliminated the
profoundly
character.
bizarre. Like she's in two scenes. I mean, again, this movie feels like it feels very disjointed, and her character is a really good illustration of that because she's in the opening. She basically has one scene with Robin Williams, one scene with Kurt Russell, and that's kind of it. And there's like no depth to her character whatsoever. And it's just like even like Robin Williams, like they make a joke about him going to visit a massage therapist, and clearly the joke is that he's going to see a sex worker. It's referenced at the beginning, and it's never referenced again. It's just oh man, it's this movie is so strange. And again, I don't think the problem is Margaret Whitten's casting. It's just there's not a lot of there. I do have to point it. I do want to point this out because there are two people from Growing Pains in this movie, and I don't know if like there was a casting person that was kind of working for both, or if a producer was somehow working for both. But Kirk Cameron and Tracy Gold are in this movie, and it feels really strange.
Kurt Cameron had 2 scenes, and they just seemed like, oh my god, we got Kurt Cameron for a day. Let's shoot 2 scenes. That's what it felt like. You know what I'm saying? Like they got him for a day, and then they got Tracy Gold for like I don't know, a night shoot. Because I didn't even realize it was her until I just looked it up later, and then I went back and looked at it really quick. I guess because she's wearing the sunglasses at night too. Like I guess the whole thing about Robin Williams' daughters is like she's in a crew with like they all wear sunglasses at night. I guess that song just came out, I'm guessing. So that's why they're doing it, but you can't recognize her until you look it up. So that was really interesting. Also wanted to point out that they reference a Dr. Death on the Bakersfield team. And Dr. Death is also a character played by Kurt Russell in the movie Overboard. So I'm just throwing this out there. Maybe one day we review Overboard and a Dr. Death Steve Williams match, maybe against Kenta Kobashi. I don't know, something crazy like that. Just throwing it out there because
You say this, but who was the entertainment company behind this movie?
Exactly. I set it up perfectly, didn't I? Kings Road Productions, which is obviously no longer around, but just wow. Yeah. What a name, folks. And I don't know if that was like an inside thing, but Kings Road is a very specific type of wording. You know what I'm saying? Like those 2 words rarely come together unless you're talking about All Japan Wrestling. So who knows? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing some context there. Maybe there's some historical context there about the meaning of those 2 words together. But Kings Road, man, it popped Jerome a lot because Jerome has been watching a lot of All Japan lately. And for me, I've actually been watching a lot of Dr. Death lately because I've been binge watching Mid-South Wrestling TV on the cock. I'm at like December of '85 right now, so I've seen a lot of Dr. Death. I'm just saying, a good Dr. Death.
So you're almost done. It sounds like you're almost done then with the.
Before it becomes the UWF, right? So I might go back to like 80, 81. So you never know. I started in '84 with the good years. But moving on to the movie again, I just wanted to point out that Reno and the crew, they're in the white and the green, and I guess that was to evoke the Joe Namath look, with the Jets and everything. And I guess Kurt Russell's playing a Jets, Joe Namath type quarterback, so I guess that makes sense. And okay, so last week I pointed out that when Icebox came out, that was the big pop because it was the halftime and everyone popped. Did you pop when Kurt Russell came out in the white shoes? Because I sure as hell did.
I mean, it's weird to me that they make this choice. Okay, it's gonna piss rain for like 15 minutes at the end of the first half, and then during halftime, and the big moment is Kurt Russell coming out in the white shoes, of course, and then the white shoes immediately get mud on them. It feels like a weird choice. Like I don't mind, like the white shoes are a great choice. And I don't know if they were like, we really want the mud, but it just feels like you have to pick one or the other for this to work. And it just feels like having him immediately go in the mud and the shoes aren't white anymore kind of defeats the purpose of of the moment you're trying to create.
Well, it's very weird that this is very similar to the Icebox moment. And not only that, the game itself is booked like exactly like the Little Giants game. It's like they get smashed the first half and they have this epic comeback. Which, today in the NFL, that's kind of like a common thing now. So it's not that shocking.
Yes.
I think there's more comeback wins than ever before, it feels like. but it just kind of stuck out more in this era because I guess when you're up by like 20 something in that era, you just kind of like don't coast and you just keep going. But some of these teams these days kind of just coast in that third quarter, and then they get fucking like, it's a one possession game now, and then they just fuck up at the end because they lose their confidence. So
I mean, Patrick Mahomes has been down 10 points in every Super Bowl that he's played in, and he has won 3 out of the 4 games. So that should tell you a lot in terms of what modern football is like. The game is much more passive friendly. It's much more defensive friendly. But in a game like this, given the mud situation, I don't know that it would be realistic for the team to come back.
yeah, because the running game would be, oh my God. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean,
that was slop.
yeah, that
They
would
were running
destroy
around
so
it.
many ACLs. Yeah, and you can barely. Again, maybe this is that thing about having that Canadian in the director's role, because for us, it's like, okay, we're looking at the score and it's kind of like a compilation, not a compilation, but like a montage of the score, and it keeps going to these numbers, and it's like, how do you get to 26? And we mentioned you have to miss 2 extra points. And they didn't even show that, which is weird. And so it's like a 26 score, and so they're coming back, and they get the last score of the game, but you can't even see the lines on the field, which I think at some point you got to get the guy to come out there and redo the lines, right? Even in 1986 high school football, or this isn't even high school. Well, you know what I mean? These are guys 12 years
I don't
old.
understand how they're playing 15 minutes. There's no way that a group of 35 to 40-year-old men are playing 15-minute quarters either.
With no backups. With no backups. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I don't know the logistics of this game. I think it would have been better if it was baseball. And I get that like they do all baseball movies, but it would have been so much better as a baseball game. Like you could get away with so much more. You wouldn't be able to do the sun. You wouldn't be able to do the rain, but I don't know. It just feels like this movie, if it was like done in the vein of like the Simpsons episode about softball, and I just think it would have been so much better. But alas, this is the movie we got. I mean, I think there's some flashes of brilliance. I know. I think you're a slightly bigger fan of how the game was shot. I think it was shot okay. I think it was probably better than Little Giants, not as good as Any Given Sunday. I think that the mud stuff was okay. I think that the locations are fine. To me, the movie feels like it takes place in the 1950s when it's supposed to take place in the 1980s, and it just doesn't. It feels like a movie out of time, and sometimes that could be a good thing. In this case, I don't think it was, because it just feels like, okay, so what happened to the schools between 1972 and 1985? Did they just stop playing the game, or like what about the games that happened 1973 to like 85 too? Like this movie, and I get you don't have to answer every question, but it just feels like there are some fundamental questions that were not addressed.
For sure. And I just want to point out that the 2 schools they filmed the stuff at, or the 3 actually, they actually filmed the inside stuff in Taft, but the football game was filmed at Pierce College, which is right, 2 miles from me. I pass it every day. And, it's like a big thing here in the Valley, the San Fernando Valley. So that's really cool. And they also filmed it in Moore Park, which I actually took a class there to get some college credit. Yeah, interesting. I've been to both those schools, and I'm just thinking like, wow, Robin Williams and Kurt Russell filmed there, man. So that was really cool to think about. But overall, I would say this is like 5.5 for me. I'm kind of being that's me being lenient.
Probably it.
But
yeah, you're more lenient.
For sure.
I would say 4 to 10 for me. 4 out of 10. I mean, this movie is just it just doesn't work. I mean, again, I think there's some flashes of brilliance, but yeah, not my favorite.
I think the thing that really didn't work for me about that one dinner scene is like it's totally self-sabotage. And I just feel like a sane person would not self-sabotage themselves in that moment, especially the thing you're trying to do is like save your marriage. I just felt like that was a total like what the F are you doing? Like it just felt like wow, like that added more to the cringe besides the fact that it was just boring conversation that that they were trying to just have conversation for the sake of having conversation. So that scene really just doesn't work. And then like why not have a therapist instead of a sex worker? I just kept thinking like why not have just a therapist in that role and just not put Robin Williams in his underwear and then not have sex with her, and it's just all about therapy. It's
why
like
not have to be a hot therapist that he may or may not want to sleep with. Like I think you're better off going in that direction.
It was very weird. It was such a weird choice, and she's a good actress.